that's just how I am. That's how I've always been. That's not who you are. Those are the patterns you've learned to repeat. Have you ever felt like you keep on ending up in the same place? Different season, different people, different opportunities. You're in a different space in your life, but somehow emotionally the feeling is similar. You start something with hope and expectation, but slowly the doubt starts to crawl back. You enter into a new relationship and you really want to embrace it and be happy, but those insecurities are nitpicking at you. You set a new goal, but those same old habits come out of the dark corners to sabotage it. And because of that, you start saying things like, I'm stuck. I don't know what's wrong with me. Why does this keep happening? But what if you're not actually stuck? What if what you're experiencing is a pattern? Hi, my name is Pearl, and this is Living with Intention, where we talk about a life that feels meaningful and not just productive. And today, I bring to you a new series on the channel called Practical Wisdom for Self-Evolution. I promise you I brainstormed the topic for this series for a long time, but as boring as the topic sounds, every single episode in this series will be useful to change the way that you see your life and that you see growth. And the first topic in this series is what I've chosen to title, You're Not Stuck, You're Just Repeating a Pattern. I truly believe that the moment we find the power to name our patterns, we can begin to change the outcome of our decisions and our lives completely. One of the reasons we feel very discouraged in life because we misdiagnose what is happening in our lives. We end up saying we're stuck, or things feel the same, or like we're not being inspired, or we are unfulfilled. But sometimes it's not that nothing is changing, it's that something keeps repeating itself, and there's a difference. Being stuck in life means that there's no movement, but repeating patterns means that there is movement, but you're just simply moving in a circle. You're doing things, you're trying every day, you're making decisions, you're entering into new seasons. But sometimes, no matter the direction you go, you find that your destination is the same emotional place. Maybe you overcommit yourself and then you end up feeling overwhelmed. Maybe you always ignore your instincts, but you end up regretting it later. Maybe you like the excitement of starting things, but once things start to get uncomfortable, you abandon and run. This is not happening because you're lazy or you're unserious or you're incapable. This happens because there is a pattern underneath your personality that you are yet to recognize. And patterns are powerful because they are subtle, and before you know it, you're adjusted and you start calling it who you are. But my dear, that's not who you are. The thing about patterns is that they begin as a form of protection. This is where we need to be a bit gentle with ourselves. I find that many of the patterns that we struggle with when we are older began as a way of protecting ourselves when we were younger. Maybe when you were younger, there was no safe environment for you to have difficult, vulnerable conversations. So now you do every single thing you can to avoid those kind of conversations because they don't feel comfortable. Maybe you've become a people pleaser because being agreeable and being a yes man helps you avoid conflict. Maybe when you were younger, hope was dashed too many times, and now hope feels risky. So you've learned to expect disappointments. At that time, these patterns of behavior were necessary because you needed to survive that season of your life. But a pattern that protected you in one season has the power to limit you in another season. And that is why self-evolution is more important than motivation. It requires awareness because you cannot outgrow what you keep on justifying, and you cannot heal what you keep calling normal. My goal in this series is to pull the blanket off of you. You know, blankets, they're a very comfortable, safe space to be in, where behaviors we've learned to normalize because they kept us safe have become harmful to us, but we don't want to let go of that blanket because it keeps us comfortable and it gives us the illusion of safety, and we keep getting stuck in the same circle and I'm here to break that circle for you today. One of the reasons that patterns are so hard to break is because what is familiar will always feel safe to our brains, even if that thing is no longer healthy for us. So what happens is, subconsciously, we choose what is familiar, not because it is good for us, but because we've learned how to function inside it. If you're used to chaos, peace, though it's better for you, can feel boring and non-essential. If you're used to being productive and proving yourself, rest can feel like laziness or like you're irresponsible. If you're used to emotionally unavailable people, healthy love can feel strange. And that is why many times we find ourselves subconsciously returning to the exact things we made up our minds we're going to leave behind. Not because we truly want the pain or the emotional unavailability or the toxicness of the chaos that we're used to, but because the human nervous system is built to prefer what is familiar over what is unfamiliar, even when that unfamiliar thing is actually better for us. And this is why I truly believe that a person can pray for change, they can truly desire change, they can make plans to change their habits for change, but they will still find themselves reaching for the same old response to life and to opportunities. Because change is really not about wanting something new, it's about becoming safe enough to choose what is unfamiliar over the familiar. That is practical wisdom. Is being able to ask yourself in real time, is this something I really want, or is just something I recognize because it's familiar to me? Is this peace, or is this familiar discomfort? Am I choosing this because it aligns with the person I'm trying to become, or because I'll find an easier time surviving with this? I think that the answer to those questions is where growth truly begins. Your pattern is usually in your response, not the situation. Because the same situations happen to everyone. For as long as we are under the sun, we experience the same things: grief, loss, open doors, opportunities, a chance at love. All of these situations happen to us equally. So finding your patterns is not in the situation, but in your response to that situation. Sometimes, yes, the situation needs change. That job, that friendship, that relationship, that environment, that opportunity, that has to go. But this is not always the case. My point is, if you keep meeting the same version of yourself in different places, then it's time to look a bit deeper. For example, you need to ask yourself, am I someone who withdraws when things get uncomfortable? When I'm misunderstood, do I feel this urgent need to over-explain myself? Do I ignore red flags because ending that relationship is harder than simply starting over? Do I assume rejection even before the person has actually rejected me? Your responses matter because your response shapes the outcome. And this is not about you blaming yourself over everything. It's about you reclaiming your power. Because if the problem is always something outside of you, then you have to wait for external circumstances to change before you can actually experience any real change. But if you can recognize your response and the patterns in your response, then you can begin to choose differently and actually influence change. Sometimes one different response can interrupt a whole cycle that you would have gone through. I truly believe that naming the pattern takes the power away from the pattern. There's something about putting a face or a name to something that has been operating quietly in your life. When you name the pattern, you're no longer being controlled by something you can't see. You can actually tell yourself in the middle of a situation like, oh, this is me avoiding hard conversations once again, or this is my pattern of staying strong when everything is exciting and then losing out when it requires discipline and consistency. Once you can put a name to the pattern, you can pause and stop yourself from repeating it. And that pause is important because where you can see real growth is that tiny little space between the trigger and your usual response. The moment you see yourself about to repeat what is familiar but no longer helpful to you, there's always an opportunity there to ask, what would the wiser version of me do in this situation? Not the wounded version, not the scared version, not the version of me that's always trying to be liked, and not the version of me that's always trying to avoid discomfort. What would the wiser version of me do in this very situation? That question may sound very simple, but it will change a lot in your life, because self-evolution is not always this dramatic reinvention. Sometimes it just looks like pausing before you say yes, having that conversation instead of avoiding it, choosing consistency and discipline when the excitement fades. Small interruptions create new patterns. If you've heard nothing else in this video, I want you to hear me clearly when I say this. You don't break patterns through shaming yourself, because shame will always ask, what is wrong with me? But wisdom asks, what is this situation? What is my response trying to show me about myself? Shame makes you hide, but wisdom helps you to observe, and you need that observation if you want to grow. If you respond to every pattern with self-criticism, you may end up feeling worse about yourself and then unable to actually do anything to change it. But when you approach yourself with honesty and compassion, there is a real opportunity there to learn. You can begin to say to yourself, oh, I see why I did this. I understand why I repeated this pattern, but I no longer want to live from that place. That is a very powerful place to begin, because the goal of growth is not to hate the old version of you. The goal is to understand her enough to stop letting her fears dictate your future. When I think about people that repeat a pattern, one of the historical examples that I lean towards are the Israelites. These guys were in slavery for over 500 years, and so even after they were delivered from Egypt, they kept on going back to the same mental and psychological mindset that they had while they were still slaves. The fear, the complaining, the unbelief, the disobedience, the constant anxiety. But I believe that these people teach us something very powerful. You can leave a place physically and still carry the patterns of that place mentally into a new season or a new environment. The Israelites were out of Egypt, but their experience in Egypt continued to shape how they saw God, how they saw His provision, and how they saw themselves. And as a result, millions of people were delivered, but only a handful entered into the promised land. The Bible says in the book of Proverbs 4 verse 23 that we must guard our hearts because the issues of life flow from it. This means that the patterns you experience in life are not random. They often flow from what's already happening internally. If someone is a people pleaser, they are always avoiding conflict, overworking themselves, they are always choosing terrible relationships. The issue may not only be in that person's behavior. It may be fear, insecurity, woundedness, pride, or unbelief underneath. Because even if that person is no longer in the situation that required all those emotions, they've carried those patterns mentally into the new situation or the new era they are currently living in. But in the same way, the Bible encourages us that these strongholds must be pulled down. A stronghold is a deeply rooted way of thinking that keeps producing the same behavior in us. The biblical response to this is to take all of those thoughts and submit them to the truth. That's because some of these patterns will not break only because we're trying harder. They can only break because there's a truth that supersedes them that they cannot contend with. So if you've been feeling stuck lately in your life, I want you to strongly consider this. Maybe you're not lazy or unserious with life. Maybe there's simply a pattern that wants to be noticed, but you've refused to notice. Once you notice this pattern, you can begin to interrupt it. Not perfectly and not overnight, but intentionally on a daily basis. Because the life that you want may not require to be a completely different person. It may simply require for you to stop making the same decisions that take you to the same place you're trying to leave behind. So today, this is the question I want to leave you with. What pattern in your life are you finally ready to put a name and a face to? You're not powerless against the patterns you've inherited, learned, or repeated. Renewal is possible, but renewal begins with honesty, surrender, and the courage to stop calling those old cycles normal or actually making them a part of your personality. If this resonated with you, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you're ready for this series on practical wisdom for self-evolution, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, because becoming wiser is not about doing more. Sometimes it starts with noticing what you're repeating and doing different. Thank you so much for watching, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up so I know that you're enjoying what I am saying. And until I come your way next time, bye. Mwah!